Hey, it's Keith Watling, the Power Appster. I really want to talk about variables. It's so easy for us citizen developers to be intimidated by variables when we first start out in Power Apps. That needn't be the case at all. Fairly simple. If you think about it like you put in ice cream in the fridge, you've made some awesome ice cream, maybe some chocolate ice cream, some vanilla ice cream, some strawberry ice cream, and you pop them in a box and you want to write on that box what ice cream is inside of that box and maybe how much there is. That's a variable. We're going to put it in the fridge and we can take that out and take a little bit out. Maybe that variable, the volume of ice cream inside that tub will change. Everyone likes ice cream, well, apart from sort of like a Christ, but that's another completely different story. So let's get on with it. So let's start by making two of the main types of variables. These are global variables and local variables. Global variables are available in all of the screens in your app. And therefore they're very good at conveying things across screens. So if you have something you want to define globally, such as a color, a type of something, then global variables are a really good choice. Local variables, also referred to in Power Apps as context variables, are only available within the context of the current active screen. Okay, what that means is that you can have the same variable on many screens, and it's really good for copy and pasting repeatable controls across screens. For example, a debug window that you may have in screen 1 that you want to put on screen 2. And you want to have an individual debug control on that screen that shows and hides the debug panel. You can just copy and paste that across because the local variable name will be within the context of that screen, whereas a global variable, if you hit to show the variable panel, it will display on the screen. So let's have a quick look at that, right? So I'm going to pop a variable on a button on the screen, and we're going to call this global variable, right? Say global for that button. We're going to have another button on the screen, and this one we're going to call local, and we're going to set each one. So let's have a look at doing that. So to set a global variable, just rename the button btn gbl, so I know which one's which. To set a global variable, you use the set function. How handy is that, right? So set, and we will call this one like show debug, and we're going to set that to true. Right? So what we'll do is we'll have a little let's have a pretend rectangle, which will be our debugging panel, and I'm going to set, at the moment, that variable is set to false, because we haven't clicked the button yet, right? We haven't selected the button yet. And all I'm going to do is just kind of pop the name of the variable into the visible property of the rectangle, right? Our debugging panel, as it were. And I want to show that on the screen. So when I click global, it's going to set the variable to true, which sets the visibility property of the rectangle to true. And therefore it's displayed on the screen. Great, but I want to hide it now. So what do I need? Okay, well maybe I need another button that says false, like says set that variable to false. Okay, right. So there we go. So like true and false. Okay, all right. Maybe not quite the best user experience in the world, but we're getting there. But let's have a look at a local variable next. Now, one of the things about variables is that local variables or context variables and global variables, also referred to as set variables, cannot have the same name. So we have to find a way of distinguishing between the two. There is a host of Power Apps makers out there who solely use global variables, and like, you know, each to their own. Personally, I prefer a little bit more granularity in my variables. Primarily because I don't want to inadvertently set something on another screen, right? So I like to have a little bit of a kind of a break between the two. So to set a local variable in Power Apps, you need to use the UpdateContext function. So let's have a look at that, right? Update, and I always spell this wrong and miss out the first T, update context. And we're going to do something really codey now. We're going to use curly braces, which are just below the plus and minus keys on your keyboard, and you'll need to hold down shift to get to them, right? So open a parenthesis, curly variable, and then we're going to put our variable name, right? So we need to call this something different now. We need to prefix it or suffix it with something different to the variable name that we used before, because otherwise perhaps it's going to get confused and it's not going to allow us to do one with the other. The sort of common practice for that is to prefix variables with loc, L-O-C, for local variable. That's what it says in the Power Apps coding standards. So we should try and adhere to that where we can. So that's a local variable, and we'll call this one ShowDebug. Again, this time instead of a comma between the set and the value, we need to use a colon. So it's going to look a little bit like if you've ever made a collection from scratch, or you've ever done a patch command. It's going to be familiar in that sense, right? So let's set that to true. Spell true right. Close curly braces. Close brackets. Now you will definitely have an error at some point when you're making variables, especially local ones, because you've missed out a curly brace or a bracket somewhere, because they can get a bit complicated later on, but we'll get to that, right? So now I'm going to change I'm going to show my rectangle so I can select it, and I'm going to change the variable to a local variable. You see the change in color as well. Note the change in color from a global variable there to a local variable. The linting, which is the color of the text, the color of the code on the screen changes. So now it's a sort of a darker blue hue, just to kind of delineate between a global and a local. I think just in terms of readability, it's always best to prefix it with loc for local, and it's either GLB or GBL. I've got into the habit of GBL for global. It should really be GLB, but yeah, you know, each to their own. I think it's because the B is underneath the G key and it's a bit faster to type. So yeah, so that's good. So now when I click that again, I can only click it once because I need to set it back to false. So again, another button, and I'm going to make that one false. There you go. Right, so true, false, and now if I click the global one, nothing happens because it's a different variable, right? So these are local variables. We just make those you know, just to sort of delineate between the two. They're going to hide it. These are going to show it. So that's going to show, that's going to hide, that's going to do nothing. We could do things. We could put a bit of logic in there to make it that it's either or. So we could use the or command. Two ways of writing or, just as a little tip. You can use the or function. So we could say show debug, which is the global one. And then it will show depending on, well, they both have to be set to false or they both have to be set to true. That's great, but like having two buttons on the screen is a bit of a pain in the butt. We don't really want to do that. So let's look at the way of doing it, where we can get rid of one of those buttons, right? So we're going to get rid of the button on the button that sets it to false, right? Let's just cover this quickly because I think it's one of these ones that almost the most common use of variables in Power Apps is to show and hide pop-ups and things on the screen. So let's cover this early on. We can change this value because we're going to refer to itself, right? Now, like this is a little bit more advanced than I wanted to get into today, but I'm going to show you anyway. And it's to turn this variable as a switch, right? So it's going to switch itself to true, itself to false. So let's start by writing way too much code, right? Let's say that if ShowDebug, I'll just paste that in there, ShowDebug is true, right? Equals true. Then set it to false. And then if it is false, because this is going to be the opposite, we'll set it to true, okay? And this is one way of doing it, okay? Oh, got to spell true properly. So when I click on the button, now shows Right, okay, that's kind of, so let's take that back one step. Well, when dealing with booleans, we can always take the front bit true off, because the if statement's going to kind of understand that it's falsy. It can be true or false. So we can get rid of that, but it's still way too much code. Like, this is supposed to be no code, low code. So let's write very little code. Let's get this down to the bare minimum, right? One of the cool things about variables is that they can refer to themselves, but they don't like referring to themselves naked. They like to have some clothes on, right? So I can't just refer to ShowDebug and set it to ShowDebug, because it kind of doesn't understand what that means. But what I can do is I can do the inverse of it, right? So what this is going to do is it's going to say, right, ShowDebug is not ShowDebug. So if it's true, it's going to change itself to false, and if it's false, it's going to change itself to true, right? So I can write the not operator around it, right? The not function, sorry, I can put the not function around it. And that's going to have the same effect, right? One button. But we can even get rid of the not operator by just using a bang or an exclamation mark, as we call them in the UK, and that changed it to true or false, right? That's super cool. How do we do that for a local variable, for an update context variable, right? It's exactly the same function, right? So we can use not, or we can use a bang, and now if we just take the local variable, put it in the view, in a visible property, we can turn it on and off that way, right? Super cool. Local and global variables, right? But it's not limited to true and false. In Power Apps, what's really cool is a variable can be a whole host of different things. A variable can be a piece of text, a number. It can also be a date. It can also be a record. You could use this item from a gallery. And that's super cool, because it gives us the opportunity to do that. So let's have a little look at some other variable types and see how they work. So I'm just going to throw a label on the screen, right? And I'm going to change our global variable here to some text. So we say like GBL, text. So I've got some text on the screen, and I'm going to set the global variable with some text. So let's do that then. Let's say that set GBL text. It's going to be some text. So we'll say hello world. Okay. And we can refer to that in exactly the same way. So in the text field, we're just going to say GBL text. And when I set it, boom, there you go, right? So living proof. You can do it with a string, you can do it with text, you can do it with a date and all that kind of stuff. Let's have a look at doing it with a gallery. So I've got a basic gallery here, and I might want to, like, when this thing is selected, so let's go and sort that out. Let's say that, you know, we might want to pass this to another screen, and this is a great way of doing this. So let's go and have a look at saying on select. So we're going to say on select, set a global variable, so GBL, and we'll call this one record, to this item. Okay, when I select that, boom, 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 make sure that one's selected, do a bit of selecting. Let's have a look at where we view our variables, right? Because we've got a bunch of variables now, and we need to kind of like see what's up, because this item is like a little bit more in depth. So like you could now use the dot syntax on those variables. So that variable that we've got, that GBL record variable that we just set, we can kind of look at things and say, oh look, there's all this stuff coming off the contact for that variable. So it has that idea that you can do the kind of IntelliSense with variables as well, which is really cool. But let's go and have a look at where they're stored. So two ways of getting to that. We can go to View, and we can click on the Variables tab, and we've got two options here. So I can see my screen, my variables basic screen, which is the name of the screen, right? And I can see that local context variable inside the screen that's currently set to true, right? Lock ShowDebug, the one we use to show and hide the rectangle, the debug panel. And I've got a global panel as well, where I can see my my global piece of text that I created that says "Hello World," and I've got GBL record. Right now, like, what's this radiator thing? Like, I've got this little car grill here, you know, and if I click on that, it gives me a bit of a definition first, and it tells me where the variables are used. Like, you know, at the moment there it doesn't have any uses; it just has a definition. But I can drill into this car grill, right? Look, so look, watch. So we go into the car grill, look, and all of a sudden we've got this glorious representation of everything that's in the variable. Now, I've got explicit column selection turned on, so there's going to be very few fields that are populated, right? So one of the only ones that's there is email address. So yeah, there's that. And that is basically how variables work. Right now, there's sort of like a third variable thing that we use quite a lot, which is the with function, and there'll be another video about that. But there's another way of passing a context variable to a screen, right? And that's with the navigate function. Now, I'm showing you this because, like, I love you and I don't want you to suffer pain and unhappiness. So I'm just going to pop a button on the screen that navigates to screen 1. And the issue with passing variables from one screen to the other is that there's a performance hit, and it's noticeable. But I'm going to show you how to do it just for the sake of being complete. But please don't do it. Use a global variable to pass information from one screen to the next. Whatever you do, don't do it this way, because the user's is a noticeable lag to the user, and it can be quite frustrating and actually cause them to click twice because of the lag, right? So open and close those curly braces, and I can pass things inside of these curly braces from one screen to the next, right? So what I can do is I can say that, like, lock ShowDebug, and this is on the next screen, right? Debug on the next screen is actually equal to lock debug on this screen, right? Show debug on this screen, right? So when I click this button, we'll go to screen 1, and screen 1 now has a variable, and you saw in the app worked really quickly, but not in real life, unless there's been some dramatic performance improvement that no one's seen. Yeah, it's not good, right? So I now have screen 1 with lock show debug, so I've passed that in. But I highly recommend that you use global variables to do that. Use local variables to just inside the screen, inside each screen, just keep them where they belong, and where you don't want to have them kind of looping outside. So that's our introduction to variables. Come back for more. Next time we're going to be talking about the with function and how we can use super local variables with inside with to really speed up our code. We're going to be looking at using variables to set the settings for our app, and using them to reduce the amount of code that we write, and also the number of errors that we write when we're coding. So come back for video number 2. Don't forget to click subscribe.